You are all set.
Okay, thank you. Uh, turn my camera off as well, see if this works a little bit better, but glad to be here. I wish we could do it in person, but hopefully in the near future we can all get together again. And I'm just going to give you kind of a general overview of the three wild canines that we have here in Wisconsin. It's going to be probably a little generic, but we could probably spend an hour on each or more on each species. So we're going to keep it pretty general. All right, some of the things we're going to cover first, just a few terms that are common to all wildlife species that not only the canines, but everything that you can find crawling or slithering or flying across the state. And some of those terms are specialist, generalists. And what that means, specialists, essentially they've got a very specific type of habitat that they need to have to do well in and live and thrive. Best example that we have here in Wisconsin would be the Kirkland's warbler. They're pretty dependent on those jack pine forests, the maintenance of those jack pines for their species to thrive and survive. And the opposite side of that coin, a generalist, is they can pretty much live anywhere. They're very adaptable, and they could take advantage of wide variety of the ecosystems and food sources. Best example we have here in Wisconsin of that is common raccoon, typically more of a woodland species. I'm sure everybody's seen them crawl through their backyards, across the decks, pretty much everywhere you can see a raccoon. And as far as where these animals live, we got three main terms: range, habitat, and territory. So by range, that's essentially where across the globe that they can be found. I mean, if you take a look at a map here, this is more than likely for a bird species, where it lists the wintering grounds, the breeding grounds, and then where they migrate through. Habitat, again, specific to each species. It's where within that range do they call home? Is it woodland forests, open grass prairies, or wetlands? Each of those three habitat types can be broken down a lot more specifically, but in general, those are the three types of habitats that we deal with. And then territory. That's where within that habitat and range where you're going to find those animals. Either the breeding pair will defend that territory, however big, depending on the species. They'll defend that area against others of the same sex, species, or similar needs. And we'll kind of you'll see that as we get into the differences between the wolves, coyotes, and foxes. Since they have similar prey bases, they'll defend their area against each other. Another term we commonly use is carrying capacity. And that just essentially boils down as how many species can survive within a given habitat. So as long as the food, the habitat for cover is there, water, other necessities are available, how many species of that, how many animals of that species can live in that area? Good visual example is that if you can only put so many fish in a bowl before it gets a little too crowded. And why that's important is because the quality of the habitat can deteriorate pretty badly, severely, and spread of disease is also another big issue with that. We see that with deer and chronic wasting disease. For deer, we don't have a lot of really good oak regeneration anymore because there's so many deer out there in the landscape that they're really chewing away and stopping that regeneration from happening. Let's jump into wolves right away. Canis lupus, or gray wolf, is the one we have here in Wisconsin. And here you can see the picture of the map on the left shows what their range is. Historically, pre-settlement, so before Europeans colonized the nation, moved across the continent, the gray area would be more and up through Canada that would be their most historical range where wolves prospered and survived. And then as the development and expansion, Europeans settled the country, they were pushed more to the northern regions. And that does make sense because there's less human population in some of those areas in Canada. Habitat, they are generalists. to a certain capacity, but they are also specialists too, because they do need those thick wooded habitats, and it's more important that they don't have a lot of human habitation around them. That's one of the key aspects, undisturbed habitat. And you can see from that previous map that they did encompass a really wide area across the country. So the open prairies of the Midwest and up through the Rocky Mountains, and then up through Canada, similar habitats there. And then just real quick here on the packs or territories. We all know that wolves are very social animals. They live in family groups or a pack. And for the most part, these numbers stay pretty consistent, mainly speaking generally here to Wisconsin. But throughout the early summer, you're having pretty much last year's young. So it's going to be 6 to 10. You got a breeding pair, the pups from the previous year, so the yearlings, and then the pups that are born that spring are going to be a part of that family group. And as you move through the summer, there's going to be dispersal, there's going to be mortality events. But a lot of those young are going to start dispersing to try to find their own habitats, their own mate, to set up their own territory. And it's been pretty consistent across the winter. Our wolf packs average about 4, so it's going to be the breeding pair, the alpha male and female, as well as probably 1 or 2 of maybe 3 of the pups from that year. And as we know, the alpha male female is the breeding pair. Is in charge of the pack in quotes, but they're typically the ones that select the denning site, the rendezvous sites, where they go for hunting the prey, seeking out the prey in the hunting grounds. Their average territory size is between 50-60 square miles. I don't have that map I showed earlier under territory is an older map, but we really don't break it down by that anymore, have that as a public tool to look at. But that's roughly what we're looking at. Those 4 animals within each pack, that's roughly the size of territory each of those groups will have. And you can see on this map, this is kind of what we're showing now, where the good wolf habitat is. Where we know packs are is the little black plus sign. Where we've seen wolves is the black dot. And then the wolf mortalities is the star. When you see those kind of scattered around, those are most likely just young animals that are venturing out from their home pack, trying to find their own territories, their own mate to colonize an area. And just a quick look at their biology. Their lifespan in the wild is 6 to 13 years old. They can last longer than that, but that's kind of the average lifespan. They can get up to 115, 120 pounds, but their late winter through early spring is their mating season. So they found their denning sites, and the breeding activity goes on this time of year, and then through early spring through summer is the pup rearing, and then through late summer, September through February is when those young animals are dispersing, trying to go out again, find their own little niche. For the denning sites, they're pretty versatile too. They can take advantage of pretty much anything that's out there. They'll take little caves, rock croppings if they can find them. They will dig their own holes. They'll take advantage of abandoned sites. But you can see in there in the bottom right, they'll also take advantage of some of the man-made tools. They've got a culvert behind those little guys there. So they will take advantage of human infrastructure as well. Some of the prey items, and this kind of is a key thing to keep in mind when we talk about the territories, is what part of that territory those animals will find their food base. And you can see here that wolves have a pretty wide-ranging diet. Porcupines are also on there, but I couldn't throw everything in there, but just gives you a general idea of what their prey base kind of looks like. And as we go through it, you'll see some of those same pictures will appear in each of the prey items for the coyotes and foxes as well. And that'll kind of give you an idea of why we don't see coyotes where wolves are real common, because their prey base is so similar that they'll defend that territory against each other. And that kind of goes the same with fox to coyote. Wouldn't be too uncommon to see fox and wolves together because their prey base is far enough apart that they'll tolerate each other. One of the common questions we do get is, especially for the deer and wolves situation, is the wolves are eating all the deer. Well, they do take a number of deer, yes, but it also serves as a great population control tool. Without the predator-prey relationship, the habitat can, if we got too many wolves, that prey abundance will go way down, and then the wolves will have to move around. But it's a great tool as far as keeping those prey populations in check, because as we can see with our deer population, if the deer population gets too high, then the habitat suffers, and that's causes declines in everything pretty much. And just a quick view of the history. So again, pre-European settlement, we kind of estimate there's 3,000 to 5,000 wolves in the state of Wisconsin, and we can kind of draw that ballpark figure based on what we know of the wolf behavior, biology, what their needs are, as well as what the vegetation looked like across Wisconsin before the Europeans moved through and settled the area. So as the state did get settled, so 1800s and moving forward, there was a lot of deforestation going on. Logging efforts was a huge part of Wisconsin's history, as well as farming was widely practiced across the state. So as that habitat changed, there was a decline in habitat, so those prey-based didn't have places to live. So that caused the wolves to slowly decline there too. One of the other things that came in is market hunting. So the bison, elk, caribou, moose, deer, all those big game animals were they essentially had unregulated hunting. So those Europeans would come in and they didn't have to follow guidelines, season regulations, bag limits, or any of that. So they would take pretty much as they could. And that taking that food base away from wolves, again, that caused a decline in their populations. Again, we talked a little bit about farming moving in, but cattle, sheep were brought in because they provided that income for our farmers, but those animals did not have kind of a natural avoidance of predators. So they didn't know how to react when a wolf pack came into them. So that caused a loss in the livestock, cattle or sheep. And that kind of led to some of the government issues, paid bounties and nuisance programs. So we still have the nuisance program today, but thankfully the bounty issue was taken out so the population could start to rebound. And the threatened endangered species, or T&E list, the wolves were officially put on in 1974 because their population was low. That's kind of what that act serves as a purpose, to allow any kind of species that gets really low to rebound to a level where they can sustain themselves. And that for wolves kind of first happened in February 2008. They were removed because their population was high enough to be self-sustaining. They were taken off that threatened and endangered list. They really didn't need those protections. Biologically speaking, they did not need those protections anymore. But due to several lawsuits across the nation, the Fish and Wildlife Service were sued and they were relisted in 2008. And you can see going down the list, they were removed again in 11, relisted in 14. And then again, as we know, late last year, they were taken off the list in 2020. But it would not surprise me if we saw something else coming down the pipe here in the near future. Not that I've heard anything, it just seems to be the way things are going. Just a quick glance at the wolf population across the state. You can see again there right after it was put on the 3 T&E list, threatened and endangered list. Population was still kind of low, but it's by the time the late 80s popped in, they started to grow and increase because of those protections. And then you can kind of see the dips it takes, especially in that 2011 here in Wisconsin. That's when we had our first wolf season, was in that 11-12 year. And then you can see that little bit of dip there, but it bounced right back. And that's pretty typical with any kind of hunting species. The hunting and trapping, along with that predation, kind of serves as a natural mimic of that predator-prey relationship. So it does serve a purpose to have the hunting, trapping out there. It just kind of, again, mimics that natural ebb and flow of species. Now, how do we manage and monitor wolves? We do quite a few things here. We do winter track surveys. We have collared wolves out there. You can see the picture here in the middle. That guy's wearing a collar. So we can use our aircraft that have the aerial antennas hanging on them, and they can track and map out where those wolves are hanging out. Now, a lot of those collars are starting to go more to the GPS readings where they're bounced off satellites. So I don't know how many of the GPS collars are out there versus the ones with antennas, but it's just kind of the next progression in technology for monitoring their populations. We get all kinds of observations. People call it in. They send us pictures of on-trail cameras. So we'll get those reports and log those and keep those locations in our database as well. Then, of course, depredation reports. And what that is when some of these wolves go after livestock, we keep track of that too, and where those positions are. Then, of course, there's howling counts where we go out to known territories, known areas of wolves, and we just kind of listen to what they're telling us. And a little bit on the winter track survey, because I've taken part in this. We actually have a block here. You'll notice the map on the left is of Manitowoc, Kewaunee County. We did have a collared animal here, I think it was about 5 years ago now. It came out of, a young male came out of the UP of Michigan, just wandered down the bay, ended up over here on our side. So we started doing a tracking block in our area. And what that is December through typically March, whenever we get at least an inch of snow, good snow cover, where we can see the tracks in the ground, we'll go out and drive random routes to see if we can find tracks. And essentially you can see here on the other picture here what we're looking for. You can see the tracks going down the middle of the road. You can see the tracks, individual tracks there on the right. And then that bottom one is called a RLU, raised leg urination. And that pretty good indicator that it's a male was out there. And I did find those tracks in that RLU here in Manitowoc County from that collared wolf. That wolf has since moved up. The last time we heard, it was up in the northern Door County, somewhere up in the peninsula. So we have not seen it down in our area for quite a while. And this was a wolf, just kind of show you some of the tracking we're able to do from that through the GPS collars. But this adult male was collared October of 2018, and you can see if it starts here, how wide ranging that is. Right in the middle of the map is Eau Claire. So you can see it goes all the way over Nicolet, eventually gets pretty close to the Twin Cities, and then ends up down close to La Crosse. So it's pretty wide ranging. This guy moving around trying to find his own pack, essentially, is what's going on here. And you can see if you follow the counter, it was October, and then finally ends kind of mid-February of the following year. Now, one of the most common things we do get, calls we get, is people say they see wolves. And you can see if you look at we got wolf on the left, coyote is on the right. And coloration-wise, they do look very similar. But if you start keying in on some of those factors, you can see that the wolf is much bigger. From the nose to the hind end is about 5 to 6 feet. Coyote is quite a bit smaller. One thing I wish if we were together, I would have two hides that I could hold up, and you could see the difference between them. But the height or how tall the animal is too is another indicator. That's where it's good to have something visual in the background that you know is a good reference to see what's to compare the two. And if we zoom in on the head, you can kind of see the differences there too. The wolf again, excuse me. The wolf on the left, you can see he's got kind of a big boxy head versus the coyote on the right, where he's got that long, narrow snout. It's a very good indicator. And we'll show you some tracks here in a second. Well, we'll show you this first. This is part of our skull and hide collection. And you can see how much bigger that wolf is versus the coyote and then the red and gray fox. Okay, here we go for the tracks. You can see on the far right, that's pretty much your standard wolf track and size. Large dog is going to be the closest example for getting close to wolfman. That's going to be highly variable. We got everything from Chihuahuas all the way up to St. Bernards. So that can be highly variable as well. But that key factor is another one when you see a wolf, but it's actually a coyote, getting a look at the tracks is going to help you decide which is which. There's a couple things you can have here. The tracking guides, either Peterson or this one for James Halfpenny, are all both great tools to have with you. I mean, you don't have to carry them with you, but if you do come across some tracks that you don't know, you can always snap some pictures, you and your fancy cell phone. But place something next to the track that's going to, when you take that picture, so we have a better idea of what the scale is. This was a possible wolf track that we found here in Manitowoc County. The landowner snapped some pictures for us, and they had the presence of mind of throwing a ruler down there. Hopefully you can see that. I tried to lighten it up as best I could, but if we look at that previous slide, we know that the dog, anything that's 4 inches or okay, the wolf track is going to be closer to 4 inches. But if we move that line down to the ruler, you can see it's a little bit less than 3. So I would call this to be a large dog, is what my assessment was. If you don't carry a ruler, throw one of these things down next to it. A wolf track is going to be bigger than half. Anything smaller than that is either going to be coyote or dog. And what you want to do is put it on the back side of the track. Do not include the claw marks, but for the front pads is what we're measuring to. You can see it's a little bit smaller than half of George's portrait here. We also look at the width of it. And you can see here again, it's a little bit smaller, but it's kind of rounded, which again kind of tells us it's more of a dog, large dog. One of the things we always talk about too with citizens that call in on reporting tracks, we like to look at more than just 1 or 2 tracks. We want to see what the stride, so the distance between the front and back feet, how far off the center line each set of footprints is. That's going to tell us a lot about what the animal's doing, what its behavior is. And if we look at that bottom part of the slide, it shows the center line is in the red dashed line, but you can see the dog is more cantered off each side of that center line versus the wolf. It's almost right on that center line as it's moving along. So that's another good indicator. You want to, again, take a look at the big picture rather than 1 or 2 tracks if it's available. Okay, we'll move on to Coyote, the next wild canine that we have here in Wisconsin. And here again, the Coyotes Range. And it's a little counterintuitive compared to what happened to the wolf. But the middle part of the country through Mexico, that darker orange color is the actual historical range. And as European settlement expanded across the nation, the coyote population actually grew with it. So they took amazing advantage and adapted extremely well to the human presence and the changes that we made to the landscape. I mean, you can see there, even through the 1900s, 1950, as early as 1990 is when they started moving into the major metropolitan areas on the East Coast. Like I said, it's through the 90s is when they first started finding them in the Washington, D.C. area. Now they're pretty much everywhere. Here again, they're pretty much generalists. They can adapt, like I said, adapt to pretty much anything. They'll move around and take advantage of as much as they can across the landscape. Just a quick slide on their territory. And it kind of depends on how they're hanging out. And we'll show you a little bit later, but they can move as single animals, just transients moving around. They can be in pairs or small packs. And it kind of depends on where they're hanging out too. So the rural coyotes, or they can be anywhere from 4 to 15 square miles, again, depending if it's a single animal or packs or pairs. Urban areas, it changes a little bit. They tend to be a little bit smaller, but anywhere 2 to 4 square miles in cities. And then your solitary animals, more of a home range. That's not really a territory they're defending, but that's just home range, just an area that they're going to move around and stay within those boundaries. And that's roughly 10 square miles. Okay, and then to look at the life history here, again, 6 to 8 years is the average lifespan. Quite a bit smaller than the wolves, probably about half the size, 25 to 40 pounds. But their year in their life is very similar to the wolves. So early spring, late winter, early spring is their mating season. Spring through summers, the pup rearing. Their gestation is right around 60 days, 63 days. Average number of pups they have is about 6. And then again, just like wolves, September through August is when those young animals are going to be dispersing to kind of head out, find their own habitat and their own mates. Here again, they're going to take advantage of either pre-dug holes, washouts under tree roots. They will dig their own holes, but outcroppings, caves, even again, human infrastructure, they'll take advantage of anything that's safe from other predators moving in on them. But they'll take advantage of wherever they can for a denning site. And then their prey items, again, you can see some of it is very similar to wolves, deer, rabbits, mice, the berries. They'll get in there and that's kind of why we see that territorial disputes. You're not going to see too many coyotes where you have good wolf population because they just won't tolerate the coyotes being there, taking advantage of the food that they need. But there is some variance there, so it's that allows them to survive anyway as well. And again, we just kind of mentioned this a little bit, social structure. You'll either have transient animals, young males or females that are out venturing around. You can have pairs, like you see in the bottom here, just 2 animals, not necessarily male and female, but just a pair of animals that are out roaming around together. And then they will have small packs as well. And some of the activity patterns we see with these guys is I guess the rural coyotes out in their more natural habitat, they're going to be diurnal and crepuscular. And what that means is either daytime or right at dawn and dusk is when they're going to be most active. And that makes sense because it's especially crepuscular, especially through the summer. It's going to be more of the cooler part of the day when they're going to be out and be more active. The urban populations, they tend to be most active at night, and that makes sense as well because there's more human activity going on during the day. So they're going to try to avoid as much human contact as they can. But we've got the word mostly on there because, again, they're very adaptive. And the more tolerant they become of human activity and presence, you're more likely to see them active during the day within city limits. Now, because of the population of coyotes is so high, they're so prolific that we do have hunting and trapping of coyotes available. The trapping season is October through February, and that primarily aligns with when those pelts or their hides are in prime condition. And that just means when those coats are full and have the most market value to them. That you can see again, the trapping season is October through February. Hunting is open year round, and that's again primarily deals with, for the most part, with like the nuisance animals, which is right below there. So landowners, occupants, if can shoot or trap, remove an animal how they see fit according to state law. But when you get into urban areas, even some rural small town areas, first thing you're going to want to do is check in with those municipalities, those townships, to see what their regulations are. Some of them do have regulations on placing traps out or discharge a firearm. But as far as the state regulations go, if they're a nuisance animal, you can remove them as you see fit. The only qualifier we put on that is the use of poisons. So if they were to put poison on a deer carcass, trying to target those coyotes, there's just too many things out there that also feed on those carcasses, is why we ban using of poisons, because there's no way to really restrict access to that carcass or that poison bait and not while other animals can get to it. So you can't hide it away from, so it's only available to coyotes. So that's the main reason we don't allow poisoning. And again, this might look a little bit familiar. I'm sure we all heard about the coyote issues that were going on down in the Milwaukee County area the last few years. So what we did is the DNR wildlife staff down there worked with the county and the city, Waukesha and Milwaukee County, to develop this plan. And because it is an urban area, it's really up to the county or the city to kind of really initiate these plans. The DNR is here, advisory capacity. We can help you get started on those plans. But the key is that the municipality really has to start that ball rolling. And some of the options for helping dealing with coyotes in those urban areas is hazing and monitoring, which I'll cover hazing here in a little bit, but just kind of keeping an eye on them. Is it just one of those transient animals that's moving through? Are you seeing it for the first time? And it's just going to keep going. So keeping tabs on it, are they return visitors or not? Specific removal. So if we do end up having an animal that is getting too habituated to what's going on our back porches or on our backyards, then again, working with the city, we can look at doing specific removal of one of those problem animals. And what they've seen with other urban areas is if those animals are in a pack, it tends to be one animal that is getting itself in trouble. It's not a pack mentality to get into somebody's backyard, but and disturb the pets or harass bird feeders, that kind of thing. So it's really up to you as a citizen again to keep an eye on it, work with your city to see what those problems are. For relocation, it is an option if we can get a live trap set for it. But the one thing we got to keep in mind for that is that if you take it out in the countryside and release it, you can't just open the crate door and let it run. You need permission from that landowner wherever you're taking it, because they might have coyote problems of their own, and bringing another one out there, they might not be too keen on that idea. And as far as the state lands go, we don't allow animals to be released out on our state land without very specific guidance. But we don't know what kind of diseases those animals are carrying. So we can't just throw them out on a state land and infect a new population. And of course, one of the last options is eradication, where they would go in and do what they can to just remove as many of the coyotes as they can out of a population in those urban areas. All right, the hazing we talked about a minute ago. And it seems kind of silly to do this, and it's not a way to get rid of your kids and husbands, but just getting out, making it a very unfriendly pace, yelling at them, beating on pots and pans, screaming. If you're out in the yard and grab the hose fast enough, you can definitely squirt them. But again, just yelling at them, making all kinds of noise making it as unfriendly a place as you can. And it's got to be a neighborhood approach. Everybody's got to get together and do this if you've got problem animals. Because if one of you do it and your neighbors on the left and the right, or 2 or 3 houses down, they're not doing anything, they're just going to avoid your yard. Kind of helps your problem, but it has to be a neighborhood approach to really get those critters moved out of your neighborhoods. And eventually, hopefully the coyotes give up, but you got to keep up that harassment until you see them moving out of the area. All right. Moving on to the red fox and gray fox. And the two species are so similar that a lot of this is kind of tied together. So we're going to cover them both together. So that's the red fox. And that's the gray fox. I've had numerous calls on that, people hearing that at night, and it, not surprisingly, it kind of freaks them out. That's kind of a strange noise to be hearing outside your window. But here you can see the range maps for red and the gray fox, red on the left and the green. And you can see they're more of a United States up through Canada versus the gray fox, which is much smaller, is the United States and then down through the Mexico Peninsula. And you can just get a quick view here of their habitat types as well. They're pretty much generalists. Again, they can live out in the wide prairies, the desert habitats, thick forests as well. So they can adapt to a lot of different habitats as well. And here you go. They do kind of hang out in urban areas. We do know that. So when they're in those urban areas, their territories tend to be pretty small. I mean, you can see the square mile, 0.07 square miles, roughly 49 acres. But once you get them out in their natural landscapes, natural habitats, can range from 5 to 15 square miles. And here again, you can kind of see a lot of those same pictures. And this is why we don't see too many fox populations in with thick, dense coyote populations, because their prey base is so similar that they're viewed as competition for that food. And they tend to drive each other off. The coyotes will drive the smaller foxes off. And again, the life history, the fox, gray, and red fox are very similar. So they're roughly 1 to 4 years is again the average. Much smaller, 11 to 22 pounds. The gray fox is quite a bit smaller than the red fox. So it's almost the size of a large house cat, if you want to need a visual comparison. But as far as year in the life of, again, very similar. Winter, spring is mating, pup rearing, April through August. Their gestation is 50 days, anywhere 3 to 7 pups. And then again, September through February, those young animals will disperse, move out on their own to, again, set up their own territory. Den sites, these guys are more likely to dig their own than the wolves or coyotes. Each of them will dig their own, but they're opportunistic as well. So they'll take advantage of man-made holes, washouts under trees through the root masses. So they'll take advantage of that as well. Both populations are fairly stable here in Wisconsin. But the only thing we really don't have any solid numbers are on the city areas. We know they live in the urban areas, but there has not been the number of studies and research projects going on for fox within those urban landscapes. Okay, like I said, it was pretty quick and dirty, generic for most of them. We could probably spend an hour on each species if we wanted to, but there's my contact information. I have the email or my phone number there on the bottom. So if you have any questions about anything, not just this stuff, but anything in the process, you feel free to reach out to me. And that, I'll turn it back over to Jess.